Thanks everyone for coming. I know there are folks online as well. And there'll be time for some discussion post panel as well. So thank you everyone. I'm Lori Spadorcha. I'm the Senior Vice President, Public Affairs and Partnerships and Chief Strategy Officer here at CAMH, and I want to welcome you to this important discussion today. I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement. CAMH is situated on lands that have been occupied by First Nations for millennia. This site where we are gathered today appeared in British colonial records as the council grounds of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, as they were known at the time. Today, Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's home to a vast diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis who enrich this city. CAMH is committed to reconciliation, to honoring the land through programs and places that reflect and respect its heritage, and to sharing and protecting it for future generations. Many of you are attending virtually, are elsewhere in the province or country, so if you'd like to, feel free to use the chat to acknowledge the land from which you're joining us today. Before we start today, just want to let everyone know that there'll be time for questions from the audience at the end. We'll take questions in person and also on the WebEx chat. So you can feel free if you're online to just register your questions as we go along. And please help yourself, for those who are here in the room, to some coffee and tea. Today, CAMH is releasing its Gambling Policy Framework. It'll be available online /gambling policy. This document presents the latest evidence around gambling-related harms and the policies that can mitigate them. About 1% of adult Ontarians meet the criteria for problem gambling. That might seem like a small percentage, but when we look at broader impact of this, it isn't at all a small concern. People with a gambling disorder had 15 times the suicide mortality of the general population, with suicide being the leading cause of death in this group. And that tells only part of the story. A gambling disorder can impact one's relationships and their financial well-being. To say it can affect their families and communities is an understatement. The overarching message of the framework is that to reduce these harms, our focus must shift from the individual who gambles to the context in which gambling is taking place. To that, the framework proposes several evidence-informed recommendations toward a public health approach to gambling. I know this is going to be a fantastic and dynamic conversation on what we think has been an underexplored topic in mental health, and I'm really delighted to welcome today's panel. This morning's moderator is Simon Haupt, who covers sports media and the business of sports in the Globe and Mail. Dr. Nigel Turner, who is a scientist in our Institute for Mental Health Policy Research here at CAMH. Dr. Daniela Lobo, who's a staff psychiatrist here at CAMH, and Richard, who's an expert by experience. So thank you all. I'm going to turn this over to Simon.
Thank you, Lori. I should begin with sort of a confession. When I was asked, I guess about a month ago, whether I would be interested in moderating a panel, and somebody here at CAMH mentioned that it was going to be associated with the release of this framework. They mentioned that it was going to happen probably at the end of March, because March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. And I thought, well, no offense, those of you who are in the space, let's say, might be very aware of problem gambling, but for most of the public out there, March is just the month that follows February. But then, you know, the universe operates in strange and sometimes fantastical ways. And so last week, you may have heard there was a pitcher by the name of Shohei Ohtani, you know, the new face of Major League Baseball, $700 million man, 700 million American, who has been ensnared in, I guess you could say, some sort of association with a gambling scandal, sports gambling scandal. And then earlier this week, a kind of low-profile Toronto Raptor. Also, it was announced that he was under investigation for questions about his play and whether there was some association with some so-called prop bets that really hit really well in the last couple of months. So all of a sudden, it seems that a whole lot of people are a lot more aware of, if not problem gambling, certainly the issues around gambling. And so I thought, well, thank you very much, Shohei, for teeing up today's conversation. So we're here now. Let's just take a step back, in part because in 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a law which essentially banned sports gambling outside of the state of Nevada. That opened the door to regulated gambling, sports gambling across the United States, and I think a few dozen states are now offering, or sports betting is now legal in a growing number of U.S. states. And here in Ontario, here in Canada, the Parliament amended the Criminal Code in 2021. Which then led to the opening of a regulated, privately involved sports betting industry here in Canada. So we're coming up on that second anniversary next week, I believe. So, and we're looking possibly at Alberta being the next province to bring in regulated, privately run gambling. So with all that in mind, I guess I'm interested in knowing from the three of you, how has it gone over the past couple of years? What do you see as the lay of the land? Nigel, would you like to open?
Well, one major change that we've noticed is in the helpline numbers that prior to April 2022, and historically, the majority of people calling into the helpline have been calling in related to problems related to slot machines. That started changing during COVID, and they started monitoring online gambling in 2021, and the percentage of the calls from to the Ontario Problem Gambling Helpline escalated after April 2022 to the point where they are now the primary reason, the number one reason people are calling the helpline is related to online gambling. So that's quite a change from prior to COVID, where it was the majority were calling in related to slot machines, to now where the majority are calling in related to online gambling.
So just to clarify, we've seen a rise in the percentage. Have we seen a rise, and I guess we should clarify, the Problem Gambling Helpline is not associated with CAMH, is that correct?
Right.
That's independently run.
Connects Ontario.
Connects Ontario, that little thing that you see at the bottom of every single online gambling ad. But so in absolute numbers, what are we talking about?
The total number of calls to the helpline is now higher than it was prior to the pandemic. So it has gone up. Not astronomically, but it has increased.
Daniela, what are you seeing?
I think in the problem gambling clinic, we see something similar to what Nigel is saying. So prior to the pandemic, it was mostly land casinos, slot machines. And then with the pandemic, we see the shift towards online gambling. And now the other shift we're seeing is also in terms of age. So we used to have the majority of our clients older than 35, 40. And now we're seeing younger and younger clients. So 25 and up. I don't have the exact numbers, but the percentage of clients 25 and up has increased substantially. And the majority of it, we don't even hear about land casinos anymore. It's online gambling and sports betting. That's not surprising, though, because if we look at the studies at countries where online sports betting was allowed earlier, we knew that was going to happen. If you look at the studies coming from England, from Spain, they are already dealing with a huge problem with increased in negative consequences of gambling in youth. And we're just seeing that reflected now in clinical services.
Please.
Also, in the helpline calls, we also saw a shift towards younger people calling and more males calling.
Richard, you're a person with lived experience of, is it sports gambling primarily?
Yes, only sports gambling.
And so that was, can you walk us through that experience a little bit? Because my understanding is you have been clean since around the time that, in fact, the floodgates opened here in Canada.
Yeah. So my experience, and I guess the way I'm going to be communicating today is not going to be about data or statistics, because that's not what I do. Myself, just very, very briefly, I'm 45 years old, and I would say roughly half my life was consumed with a sports gambling addiction, which just continually got worse as I got older and into different facets of my life. And there wasn't really anything that happened in my life, as great as they were, whether it be an experience to work in the Caribbean, whether it was getting married, whether it was having children, that was able to derail me from my addiction. Fortunately, November 2020 was the last time that I placed a bet on sports, and I've been clean for 3.5 years now. So the rollout in 2021, from the perspective of an individual who has, I consider myself a very severe sports betting addiction, I thought it was incredibly irresponsible the way that the rollout came. As it was mentioned here, we're kind of behind other countries, other demographics that have already rolled out sports betting. So why didn't we learn from experiences of other countries to say where the numbers are going to come from? Is it going to hit the younger generation? Who are the targets? And you sit, and I love sports. I love watching sports. I've played it all my life. And it was impossible to turn on anything without being inundated with some kind of advertisement with Connor McDavid, with Wayne Gretzky, with Jamie Foxx, with Kevin Garnett, just throwing the luxuries of sports gambling in your face. And I'm sitting there going, wow, this is actually pretty disgusting that this is what we're watching on television right now. So from an individual perspective, I was very disappointed in how it was rolled out and why it has taken so long for the governing bodies to adjust the way that they market.
So just to clarify again, it was legalized in 2021. It was rolled out in April 2022, right? So we're, again, now coming up on the second anniversary. So let's focus a little bit on the nature of sports gambling, because of course, as we know, gambling has been with us for really millennia. It's something apparently inherent in human nature, but there does seem to be something fundamentally different in the experience of online sports betting, as opposed to just the sort of traditional kind of gaming or gambling that used to go on. Can either you, Daniela, or Nigel speak to what the essential difference is?
I think there are several layers to it. One layer to it is the ease of access. So we've had studies for years in Canada and other countries linking ease of accessibility with increased in gambling problems. And the first studies were on the distance between urban centers and casinos. But that can be extrapolated very easily to just being able to access it in your home. So there's that. There's also the immediacy. So you place a bet and you're placing it during the game, and that keeps you in the game and watching it. The other issue that I find quite disturbing is the fact that we know that we tell our youth, playing sports is healthy for you. It gives you a sense of accomplishment, of community. It decreases your exposure to drugs up to a certain point. So you're linking a healthy behavior in youth to an unhealthy behavior and a potentially risky behavior. So I think there are several layers there that are not easy to detangle, and that certainly contribute to more harm.
I'll echo those comments. And it's not just the availability, because you can't get away from the internet. You get ads on the internet. You get ads for the internet on your TV, on your phones. If you play browser games, they have ads for online gambling in Ontario. But it's also sports betting traditionally was not a big problem. Back in like 20 years ago, most of the sports betting was parlay bets or single event bets. And either way, it's a discontinuous form of gambling. So you make a bet and then you wait until the game ends, you get rewarded or you lose, whichever, you make another bet. The way that it's set up now, it's become more continuous because there are so many things you can bet on. It's not just the overall outcome of the game anymore. I went to one of these online. I have a couple accounts, online gambling accounts, and I was looking at all the different types of bets I could make, and the number of different types of bets is enormous. But this is, and it's not just sports betting though, it's also online betting. In general, online gambling has greater availability, greater accessibility. It's also the minimum size of bets is lower, which means it's easier to get started. And that's an important factor. If I go into a major casino and I try to play blackjack, I've got to bet $20 a hand most of the time. That rules out most people because they're not going to want to risk $20. I go online and I can make a bet for $1 a hand or even less. And that increases the accessibility of the game to establish the behavior. And it's continuous. Table games, slot machines, and now sports games, you can bet on continuously something. Every time you finish one bet, you can move on to another bet, to another bet. You make multiple bets at the same time. So you have a much greater availability of different bets, and that I think is an area of concern.
So let's just drill down on that for a second before I ask you, Richard. You know, those in the industry would say, well, look, isn't that great that you can, you know, be engaged in some sports match that you perhaps otherwise wouldn't care about for $1. That's your price of entry. Isn't that fantastic that it's only $1 rather than $20 or $50? I don't know. Do you want to?
Well, I would agree if that was all you could bet. You know, the maximum bet was $1. And it would be a lot harder to lose your life savings if that was the case, but that's not the case. Maximum bets can go quite large. So.
Yes, I believe if anybody who follows Drake, or even if you don't follow Drake and, you know, somehow he comes into your orbit because everyone is talking about Drake's $750,000 bets. By the way, tip, if you're following Drake, bet against him. So. That because that's I'm not an expert. It's just what I've heard. So Richard, I don't know. Do you want to speak about you know, the challenges there with you know, the fact that, look, you can get in for $1. Is that not bad?
To build on what Nigel said, it's just it's an easier entrance way. They allow you to bet $1 because they know you will not stop. It's the whole analogy of why does Costco sell chickens at a loss? They actually did a study on it. It's because they're happy to lose $2 on the chicken because your bill's still going to be $500-600, and they're going to come ahead at the end. And it's the same methodology when you think of a gambling. Well, yeah, we'll let anyone in. You want to place $1 here, $2 here. We know eventually we're going to get you, and that too is going to become 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, and hopefully most people are able to say, "Whoa, this is getting out of hand." But I think we all know the reality is that that's not how it works. So it's very strategic to allow that. The difference at the casino is that there's overhead, there's staff. You can't allow that. It's got to be a huge profit center. So it's two very, very different establishments on how they approach, how do we get the most people in? How do we get the most money into our pockets?
So in case you're following along, just to be clear, afterwards, we're all going to go out and arbitrage chicken. From Costco, we're going to buy a whole lot and then just sell it. So I connected with the release of this framework. My news organization, newspaper, the Globe Mail, published a piece about the framework in today's paper. And while perhaps I don't make a habit of reading the comments, I will tell you that I did read a couple of comments on the article reported by one of my colleagues today, and I'm curious to know about your reaction, because this commenter said that while he, I'm sure it was a he, believes that in fact ads for sports gambling should be banned because he believes they're a plague on sports. He said, he wrote, quote, "Gambling addiction is not mental health. It is a loss of self-control." Daniela, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I think that, first of all, I think the empathic side of me comes out because as humans, every time we are faced with something that is scary, we tend to say, not me. And that's the history of addiction. That's the history of mental illness. So historically, addiction was thought of as a character flaw. We've known through science for decades that that's not the issue. However, from an individual perspective, it's easier to deal with when you think like that. When we look at one of the core aspects of the psychopathology or the issue with addiction is the loss of control. People want to control their gambling in the same way that most people would love to be able, most people have an alcohol use disorder, would love to be able to control their alcohol intake. They are unable to do so. And that comes through a variety of environmental and neurobiological issues that are outside of a person's control. It's not a matter of choice. In fact, it is a matter of lack of choice. People don't have the choice of controlling it. And I think that's such a disservice because that's exactly what the industry uses to shift the responsibility towards the individual versus accepting the health costs, the individual costs, the family costs that all these risky behaviors cause to all of us. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and I would say more generally, most mental health disorders involve an aspect of loss of control. And depression is a loss of control over your emotions, your moods. Anxiety, similar. So yes, it is. Loss of control is actually fundamental to mental health problems.
I don't want to put any pressure on you, Richard, but I don't know whether you want to speak to that.
Yeah, no, I have no problem communicating, at least as best as I think I can as an individual who went through an addiction and has been able to recover. And one of the things I've had to come to realize is that at least with my sports betting addiction, you almost come to terms with the fact that it was not a financial problem, but it was an emotional and mental problem that you suffered from. I know I created and most people with I can only speak to sports betting addictions and because I don't know if it's different with, narcotics or alcohol or whatnot. But as a sports bettor, once you get behind, you start creating a mountain of problems in your mind that you believe are unsolvable.
Sorry, when you say once you get behind.
Once you get behind, when you accumulate debt, right? You create all these problems in your head that you really think cannot be solved. And the only rational way you think you can solve your problems is by gambling your way back to normalcy. And all that does is that it continues to kick you down further and further and further. And the merit of your decisions every day become worse and more irrational. And you completely neglect the well-being of yourself, of your family, of the people you love. When in actuality, the next best gamble that anyone with a sports betting addiction should be to bet that your family will be there for you and that you need to communicate that you do have an addiction And we deal with guilt, we deal with embarrassment, we deal with so many emotions that we just don't think our family can handle. But for me, one of the best things I did was once I came clean to everyone. And there's a whole lot of circumstances, but they were there for me. And those relationships will always be strained forever. I have been forgiven, but you don't forget. And there will always be an element of doubt in people's head. Is that okay? We know he's clean. He's continuing his recovery. I've successfully completed the CAMH Gambling recovery. I continue recovering through the GA program, but they'll never know. And like we touched on earlier, the accessibility of it is that I could finish here. When I jump in my car before I decide to drive back home, I could cause damage again. But I'm at a point now where one more mistake and I lose everything. And I think I touched on what the question was. So.
Yeah.
So let's speak a little bit about the damage, not necessarily, in such an extreme example as yourself. And thank you, by the way, for that. But, the framework notes that, and I'm going to quote it, while a small percentage of gamblers account for most of the money gambled, most gambling harms in society are experienced by people who gamble moderately. I'm wondering whether, Daniela, I don't know, are you able to draw that out for me? This notion that, not everybody will be at risk of perhaps losing their house. But even those who participate moderately would appear to be suffering harms.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about gambling moderately, we're many times also already talking about people who are experiencing some form of negative consequence that don't necessarily meet the severity of a gambling disorder. So these are people who are already spending a significant amount of time. They are spending a significant amount of money, and this causes strain in relationships. It may cause absenteeism from work or presenteeism, where people are present at work but not performing adequately because they are thinking about gambling or even gambling on their phones. I remember treating a person who was gambling so much at work because they were on online slots at the time, and they would put $1,000 on the slots and let it roll, and they were teaching and at the same time gambling. So they would teach a bit and look at the phone, and teach a bit and look at the phone. So, these are things that you don't even imagine unless you're really talking to people. And these costs add up. So what are the other issues that happen? And I think Nigel probably has the statistics of that better than I do. But while you're gambling, you're also sitting down, and you are not moving. That starts increasing your cardiovascular risk. Obesity. I had a client years ago who was a young client who was doing a mixture of online gaming and online gambling, about 16 hours per day.
Sorry, do you want to draw a distinction between those two?
Yeah, so online, we're having problems with online gaming as well. So that doesn't involve money, but involves the excitement and the activity of it. And within the online gaming, there are also loot boxes where you can bet. And he was also doing online gambling through online casinos or online gambling sites. About 16 hours a day, a mixture of it. 22-year-old developed deep vein thrombosis. Now, that's something that's very serious. You do not expect on a 22-year-old. Was investigated to see if there was any genetic risk. He had 2 episodes, and this was one of the most severe cases I saw. So there's a multitude of other health risks that are not necessarily directly connected, but that happen. Another issue that is happening, especially with youth who stay in front of the computer for a long time, is that we're seeing rising rates of nearsightedness. And because it actually affects the way the eye develops. So there's so many things that we don't even know yet that are involved in it.
Though to be fair, I mean, the last issue is something that we've seen in kind of growing numbers over the past 10 years or so.
Yeah.
And we could just as easily blame Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, but we already blame him. Well, I was going to say for enough, but we probably don't.
Definitely. I think it's just one more way into it, right? We're just compounding the problem. I don't mean to, to just say that that's the only reason, but it compounds.
So let's stay on, as you say, the youth for a little bit. My understanding is that CAMH studies have found that in Ontario, more high school students are experiencing, or at least at risk for, gambling problems. Sorry, Nigel, did you want to jump in?
Well, the rates of gambling problems have actually gone down amongst youth, but but specifically online gambling has gone up, so that they're more participating in online gambling, and where that is going to go is a concern, is a big concern of us right now.
So in absolute numbers, the numbers have gone down.
Yes.
So that would be a win.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's been a trend over the past 20 years, that the rates of problem gambling amongst the youth, at least what we've recorded in our surveys, has actually dropped. But we're now seeing a sharp increase in the number of people who are gambling online. We've also seen an increase in the number of people who are playing video games online. And video games, as Daniel alluding, is getting expensive because there's actually a convergence going on between gambling and video gaming, with loot boxes and other microtransactions that are occurring.
Sure. Now, but we should probably stick to sports betting because there's enough to unpack there. Daniela, you said that you are seeing more younger people, not necessarily youth, but the kind of the demographic is increasing. The size of the number of people that you're seeing in the younger demographic is increasing.
Yeah, and just so, I don't know if everybody knows that, but the legal gambling age in Ontario hasn't changed, is 19. And so in our service, we used to see people 18 and above. Because of the issues with gaming, with the old video games that are now online games, the age was decreased to 16. I think everybody has heard about this issue of how do you confirm your age on websites, and that has been more related to pornography, but it's also an issue for gambling. Right? If the legal age is 19, how are you monitoring that? But we are seeing more younger people 20 and above. Like the majority of our clients used to be 40 and above, and now we're seeing more and more people 20 and above coming for issues with online and sports betting predominantly.
And I should note that the industry, very strongly pushes back against the idea that it's easy for a teenager to access sports gambling. But I guess the question is whether ultimately that matters as much as they suggest it does. That is to say, if we're seeing problems among 20-year-olds, that's still a significant problem.
Yeah, so if we look at brain maturation, we know that the area of control in our brain, which is mostly the prefrontal cortex, is only fully matured at 25. And that has been an issue that we have discussed in terms of cannabis legalization and all other issues, because we know it is a significant problem. And once you establish those neural connections that leave you vulnerable for an addiction, those are very hard to undo. And you also are losing a very important developmental stage in your life. The time these 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds, they're spending gambling, they're not spending developing their social network. They're not spending studying, or they're not spending working. So it's a very important time when you're building your life. And that's very important to realize that it's affecting people at a very significant developmental stage.
Is it fair to point out, though, that that sports gambling, among other gambling forms, is also often social? It's done in groups. Nigel?
That is true when you're making private bets, a sporting pool. Online gambling is not social. So there is a distinction, and I think people have been moving away from the social aspect of sporting pools, where people get together with their friends and just they come up with their own fantasy sports teams as a group. I think people are getting away from that because you can now do this easier online and make more money, have larger bets. I also wanted to address the issue of youth. I've been asked a few times by reporters about why we're concerned about youth, besides the fact that the brain is maturing. But one of the things was pointed out that people below the age of 19 theoretically cannot get onto online gambling, at least not the legally regulated ones in Ontario. And they do have questions to screen out people, but these ads are encouraging people to bet on sports and encouraging the youth to gamble. And a lot of youth gambling before the age of 19 is done with private bets. People would be, some guy sets himself up as a local bookie and takes bets from his schoolmates, or they play dice in the stairwells. And when I was doing some prevention work a few years ago, that was actually one of the major reasons schools would invite us to present there, was because they had a problem with kids playing dice in the stairways or some in the playgrounds. And there's the issue of, are they changing the way their brain works and establishing that behavior? Most males who develop a gambling problem do so as an adolescent.
The bookies I hear lately have shifted into chicken, because the profits may be bigger there. Richard, let's, you mentioned Wayne Gretzky, you mentioned Jamie Foxx, you mentioned celebrities. Obviously, so I think most people here are aware that over the past year, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario changed the standards after really a year-long consultation and process, and last month rolled out new standards for the use of celebrities and either current or former athletes. That's why we, at the moment at least, no longer are seeing Wayne Gretzky driving his Zamboni in ads for BetMGM. We are, however, seeing Connor McDavid, because Connor McDavid has been redeployed from those purely promotional efforts to promoting what is known as responsible gambling. Can you give me a sense of what your experience is like now? I guess initially watching the ads over the past couple of years, and now the shift to Connor saying, hey, you should use these great responsible gambling tools.
Right. Well, for myself, with the rollout of the athletes and celebrities that were promoting the gambling in the commercials, I was, thankfully I was already in recovery. But at the same time, for me, it was still trying to contemplate this glorification of gambling. And as someone in recovery and someone who's going to have to declare himself a compulsive gambler to my grave, there's always the risk that something can trigger me, that can get to me, as best as I can to fight everything off. So me and my son, we share a very special bond with hockey. He plays hockey. I love hockey. We love our drives to the rink. We love everything about that we share together, which includes watching hockey at home. And he's an Edmonton Oilers fan, and he idolizes Connor McDavid. My house has pictures and jerseys and everything about Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. So when he wants a new pair of skates, he wants Connor McDavid skates. When he wants a new stick, he wants Connor McDavid stick.
And sorry, he's how old?
He's 13. He's going into grade 9 in September, right? So he's at the prime age to latch on to his favorite athlete and idolize them, the same way I did growing up with Steve Eiserman. Sidebar. So, you know, it was very difficult as a father to sit on a couch with my son and during intermission or during a break, and all of a sudden Connor McDavid shows up with Wayne Gretzky, and there's, like you said, the Zamboni commercial, and you got Wayne Gretzky cheering on a basketball game on his phone. When have you ever seen Wayne Gretzky talk about basketball other than that particular advertisement? So my son has asked me, what is a money line? What's an over-under? And I have always swayed away from answering. I would just change the subject instantly. He's too young to understand what I'm doing, and we start talking about something else. So February 28, 2024, celebrities are no longer to directly promote sports gambling anymore, and it's now a shift to responsible gambling. So the new commercial now is Connor McDavid in someone's kitchen with some guy, and they talk about his compulsive addictions. And one, I believe he's got his beard in a pot because he likes cooking, or he created an outdoor rink in his backyard. Connor McDavid, you know, as best as he can, is saying, you know, I'm very concerned about all this stuff. And it's not enough. It should just be completely banned. There's no reason Connor McDavid needs $1 million from BetMGM or however much they pay him to say don't get. Just, it should be banned in its entirety. Because there's enough on the sports broadcasting where they still talk about, you know, the lines, the over-unders, the totals, this and that. It's still out there, and it's still very visible to youth. And to go back to one of the particular other topics about you seeing a rise in, I believe, 20-year-olds now, is because prior to legalized sports gambling, you needed to know a guy to be able to place these private bets. You don't need a guy anymore because you can do it online, or you can walk into Becker's, or when you fill up gas, you can walk in and that's your guy now. So it is a decent change. And ironically enough, I was watching the Edmonton Oilers last night against the Winnipeg Jets, and it was on TSN3. And I guess TSN3 was picking up the feed from Manitoba. And it was the third period, and my mind is not at all thinking about lines, anything, because I'm not hearing about it at all. But then all of a sudden it goes to break and a commercial pops up. And right away, this guy's face just shows up on the screen, and he says, bet to win. And right, like, holy shit. But then he goes, but expect to lose. And then it says in big bold letters, know your limits. So I searched this up, and it's the province of Manitoba's safe gambling website. And there's a whole bunch of great catchphrases, and I'm sure they put it on their TV all the time with these catchphrases. And it's warnings. It's telling you, you will lose. Like, do not try this. There's nothing good about this. They don't glorify it. It's you will lose your money. And we have not seen that yet. You know, I love Connor McDavid, but he's got to stop the nonsense.
I have a similar thought about the idea of this responsible gambling messaging to what we do with alcohol. You have a lot of ads on TV that tell you not to drink and drive, but they never say don't get drunk. They never say maybe just don't drink that much.
And so with that in mind, despite the fact that the AGCO has just spent all of this time and effort and consultation and changed the standards, CAMH is still in its policy framework calling for significant restrictions, additional restrictions.
Well, we're pleased that they made this change. You know, that I mean, it's great that they listened to us to some extent. We don't think it quite goes far enough.
So among other things, you're calling for what's known as a whistle to, I mean, you're calling for many restrictions, but you're calling for what's known as a whistle to whistle ban, which would mean no mention of and no ads regarding sports betting from the beginning of the match until the end of the match. Before I ask you, Nigel, Richard, would that help your experience of watching a game? If there were, I mean, would that make a significant difference?
I think so. At least I would feel comfortable knowing that my son can sit and watch his favorite sporting event without these subliminal thoughts of sports betting being planted in his head. Both of my children know of my addiction. My wife and I, we made a decision to tell them. They were old enough, they needed to understand, where does daddy go every Thursday night? Because I kept telling them it was work related, and we said, no, they need to understand. And it was just, okay, well, you have a gambling addiction. Okay, great. Can I go upstairs? Like, yeah, you can. You know, I think, you know, it's funny. Not that it's funny. It's just, you know, a couple of months ago, you know, a quite a popular restaurant franchise was held liable in the death of a 19 or 20-year-old who overserved them. And he left the bar and he got into an accident and he killed himself. And this particular restaurant, they were held liable. And the AGCO said restaurants are taught and are expected to understand the signs of when someone's had too much and they need to cut them off. And apparently this restaurant failed in its duty. So you think about that, and has the AGCO thought about that? And does the guy at Becker's have the skills to know when someone's coming in with their last $500, $1,000 trying to recover their life? Do they know what they're doing, or the hell do they gonna care? You know, I get a percentage of that. It's revenue. I get to feed my family. So is there accountability on the AGCO, you know, to train all these vendors across the province? And as a vendor, I'm gonna say, I didn't sign up for this. I just want to sell my chips, my Gatorades to kids, and I don't want to have to worry about people that have degenerate problems. And I'm not really sure what I'm trying to accomplish with that statement, but I think it's a good thinking point to say, well, if this restaurant has to be responsible for not serving Jim 25 shots of vodka, well, what about Jim at Becker's, who just let some 19-year-old kid walk in and blow all $2,000 that the kid just made in 3 months working?
I think it's such an important point that you're making, Richard, because we forget that from the tobacco to the alcohol to any industry that works with addictive products, they use human psychology to advertise. The effect of these ads is that it also normalizes and links betting with watching sports to younger and younger kids. And I witnessed this the other day because I have a 9-year-old niece who loves baseball. And she can recite the gambling ads that are played between the games. And I told her, I said, you know what your aunt does, right? I've been treating people addicted to gambling for over 20 years. So it's these conversations that we need to be aware of too, that when you say, oh, isn't a $1 bet a great thing? Is it a great thing for whom? For the people who are deriving profits from it. We know, because of the way alcohol sales work in Ontario and in Canada, we know how much the country makes from alcohol sales, the same way that we know how much our province makes from gambling sales. From alcohol sales, we also know that there is a huge deficit because the amount of money we spend on regulation, policing, healthcare costs associated to treating gambling, alcohol-related problems is huge, and it far surpasses the profits we have. With gambling, that cost is harder to know because you would have to calculate costs of bankruptcy, of people divorcing, of people losing their work or presenteeism, all of that. Those are costs that are much harder to calculate, and people hide behind it. But I wouldn't be surprised if when we can actually get to that cost, we would be losing money as a province.
And also that most people who have a gambling problem don't seek treatment. So
Exactly.
that means that we underestimate the actual costs, the health consequences.
So I'll just note that in about 10 or 15 minutes, we will be taking questions from the audience. So get all of your chicken-related queries ready. We will also be taking questions, I gather, from the online audience. So that's about 10 or 15 minutes. So yeah,
Yeah, can I make a comment?
please.
It was about what Richard said about knowing a guy that was how he used to do sports betting. And the one positive thing about the legalization is that the organized criminal bookies theoretically are out of it, although whether there's organized crime in the online, that's an open question. And I did research in prison system where there were a lot of people who were in prison because they had broke somebody's leg to pay off their debt to their bookie. So there is a positive aspect to it, but I think the amount of harm that we're doing by flooding the province with this advertising outdoes any potential benefits that can occur.
Well, I mean, let's stay on that for a second because, in fact, of course, one of the reasons, certainly the industry says to regulate is so that everything is overseen by the province, by authorities. And it's not just a question of tax revenue, but it is a question of control. And not just putting some guys who break people's legs for a living out of business. Is there some, I mean, is that valid?
There are some positive aspects to regulating, especially with the internet because it is so unregulated. But the amount, but they never actually discourage people from gambling at all. Instead, it's all encouraging people to gamble on these now regulated sites. So it doesn't really solve that problem.
Okay. And it encouraged them to use these so-called responsible gambling tools. And we have heard an increasing amount about RG or responsible gaming, responsible gambling, and that is something that encourages individuals to control their own gambling. So the policy framework that CAMH has published recommends moving from engaging with sports gambling in a responsible gambling framework to one of a public health approach, which would be more comprehensive. Daniela, do you want to draw out for me what that would mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's finally using what we have learned from other addictions. We use the public health approach in tobacco advertisement. We use the public health approach in alcohol advertisement and cannabis advertisement. Talking not only from a clinical perspective, but from a biological perspective, we know that genetic vulnerability for addictions is not specific to an addiction. There's a huge overlap. So we already know that this works better. We know from countries who are dealing with the same issue that they are shifting to a public health approach. So that's what works better. We're all humans. So and shifting again, when you shift from an individual responsibility to a public health approach, you're going to have better results because the individual responsibility is about putting the burden on the individual when the burden is actually on society. We are the ones paying the price. The individual pays the price as well, but as a society, we're the ones paying the price. And it makes more sense. It makes more sense in terms of population health. It makes more economic sense for the health system and for individuals as well.
So what fundamentally are we talking about? We're not just talking about eliminating Connor McDavid from
we're talking about not advertising, not incentivizing people to gamble, not saying, oh, it's a problem of you controlling your gambling, and this is not a potentially harmful behavior. It's only potentially harmful if you don't control it. It's accepting that, yes, there are people who are going to engage in gambling and not having harm from it, but there are harms associated, and accepting that that's that's the reality of it.
Also, and this is particularly true of online, but it's also true of casino gambling. The casinos know who their best customers are, the ones who are losing the most, the ones who are spending the most. If you have a loyalty card, they know exactly how much money you've lost. And of course, online, they know everything you do. They know every bet you make. Offline, the slot machines, they don't know every bet you make. They don't know when you started chasing, but they can tell from a day to day to day.
Chasing a loss.
Chasing is when you lose money and then you bring more money into the casino to try to win back what you lose. It's the quintessential mark of a person who has a gambling problem. Online, they know that because they have every single bet on record. So do they have a responsibility to actually monitor the behavior of a person while they're gambling online and look for signs? Because you can tell from the record of their gambling whether they have a gambling problem. It's not that hard. Now, I mean, you could make the argument that, well, rich people can afford to lose millions of dollars, but you can look at how they escalate. Also, you can check their bank records. You need to give your bank account information out to get online anyway. So they know basically what your financial resources are. And so a public health approach could involve actually utilizing that information to guide people. If somebody starts going out of control, well, tell them, you're escalating your bets, you're chasing your losses, you're going down a dangerous path that can lead to bankruptcy or suicide or other disasters.
And actually, Canada was one of the first countries to establish low-risk gambling guidelines, which talks about number of times gambling per week, less than 3 times per week, less than 1% of your total income per year. We know that people who are spending at least $1,000 a year gambling are at higher risk of developing gambling problems. And other countries have studied, even Australia has done a study on what is the risk of developing gambling problems for different types of game in relation to percentage of income expenditure. So we have that data. What I have been hearing, though, and I know some people who work abroad for gambling sites, is that what online gambling industry is doing is that they have an algorithm for people when they start gambling to have an early win. And we have known for decades that an early win puts people at risk of developing gambling problems. So they're using their data to their profit and not for protection of the population.
Richard, what might, and I know obviously, again, you have been clean since before the introduction of online sports gambling in Ontario. What kind of a difference might it have made if you had been surrounded by a kind of recognition that sports gambling was a public health matter?
To be honest, as an individual immersed fully in an addiction, wouldn't have mattered. I was too far deep that the fact that I have devastated my family and my wife's family, no public message was going to be more visible to me to say, hey, you got a problem. But I'd like to go back a step to what the government could do, and it's just brainstorming. And I think through COVID, we all learned how quick the government can shut you down. So the tools are there. We live in the most technologically advanced state of the world that we ever do. So the data and analytics are there. Why can't we not perhaps put a guideline that, when you go into a convenience store, because you can't, no convenience store owner is going to track what Richard from my area comes in every day. And yeah, he may say, holy geez, this guy comes in a lot, but I don't really know what he's spending. Why not have a gambling card? And if I go in and I want to put a single bet on something, well, here's my card, slide it into the machine that spits out the lotto tickets and it tracks my analytics. And you have all these, if anyone's had to try a mortgage, it's not the mortgage broker that's making the decision. It's some underwriter who has a massive checklist and is going through all the data, all the analytics, making sure all the numbers work before he'll give you money. So why can't the government do the same with sports betting? It's not difficult. Yes, there'd be a huge implementation project and whatnot, but maybe you have a cap. Well, hey, this guy bet $1,000 this week. Guess what? That card, you cut it off. You just shut it off, and that card will not work anywhere. The online analytics, there's no way all these massive websites do not already, as they touched on, have the analytics to track every dollar that an individual sends. You have to send in your name, your number, your driver's license, a void check. Like, they know exactly who you are. So the government can do it, but as you guys said previously, it's a huge tax revenue generating business. And unfortunately, I think that will ever supersede their true willingness to want to help society.
So we're going to be taking questions in a few minutes, but let me just ask, one of the things that the framework does is, again, make a number of recommendations, and not just around the advertising. It's around the products themselves, the nature of what you're playing. And my understanding is that you would like to see some of the products fundamentally changed. And I know neither of you wrote the policy framework, but do you think it would be helpful if the products were fundamentally changed to, for example, make it less enticing, to not give you a thrill when you win? It would just be, yes, you've won. Build in timeouts after 30 minutes of play, 15 minutes of timeouts. Do you think those would make a difference here in Ontario?
Well, theoretically, if the games were less continuous, and this, as I said, it's the continuousness of the game on the availability. If you reduce the availability and you reduce the continuousness of the game, then you could theoretically make the game less problematic.
Yeah, and some of the studies, not necessarily on sports betting, but on other types of games have shown that when you introduce, when the games are less continuous, when there are timeout periods, when you have a limit to bet size, these are all things that are protective. So that's the way for a public health approach to taking responsibility over the risk of harm.
I'm not sure who's handling questions here in the room. Do we have some questions in the room? Yes, sir.
Yeah. So my question is,
And by the way, can the online audience hear him?
so my question is, what does the ministry responsible for mental health in Ontario say about what CAMH is doing? Are they willing to come on side?
I don't know if any of us can answer that question.
But are they being engaged in, are they aware of this research? Are they following it? Are they paying attention to it?
Well, they do fund our institutions, so we exist.
Funded with the money they make out of gambling, that's right.
They are aware of the research, definitely. Well, the thing is, the separation between what's the Ministry of Health and who takes care of gambling is different, right? They're different ministries. So the policy doesn't necessarily come from the same place. And that's why we're talking about a public health approach, because that would change things.
Yes, I'm like to chat to or get your reaction to the use of the phrase public health approach, and wondering if we're really doing a public health approach. If we use tobacco as an example, we've got 60 years of experience on it. Where we had success in tobacco was a multifaceted approach, which dealt with, public awareness and education, which are both different. We also dealt with access. We also dealt with pricing. We also dealt with packaging. We dealt with regulation. And just as importantly, we dealt with treatment. Are we really talking about a full public health approach on the gambling addiction issue, or are we just talking about dealing with advertising? Because if we are, we won't make it.
And I think the CAMH policy speaks to that. That is talking about a full public health approach. I mean, we focus more on advertisement, I think, here in this discussion because it has been so prominent. But when we're talking a public health approach, we're talking about all of this. And I do, I'm very much of the mindset that we have to use the lessons we've learned from tobacco and alcohol.
I have a question from online, from Narges. How can family members help someone with a gambling addiction?
Well, this is a tough one. And the first step is that the individual who has the addiction has to tell the family. The reality is that family will love you. Your family will want you to be better. Your family will never truly understand why you made the decisions you did. And that's fair. And that's something that, in my particular case, I've had to accept. They will never understand why I did what I did. And there's no way I could ever try to explain it. I could only be judged on my physical decisions and actions that are visible to the people around me. So the one thing I would suggest for family support, one is to not try tell them, using derogatory words to express how you feel, but just being there. They're going to be hurt, and it's going to take a while. It's a long road to get back to where you've been. I mean, there's normally three things that an addict loses that unfortunately the family suffers with as well. One is their sense of values. Two is money. Three is time. So an individual could get back their sense of values and repair the damages they did within the family. Through hard work, a person can make money back and repair damages with their family. One thing that no one could ever get back is time. We all waste time as an addict. The family suffers because of that. So as family members, be supportive, but also firm that they have to recover. It cannot just be pushed. There were times where I would half recover and convince everyone that I was fine because I did not succumb to the fact that I was an addict and I could not do this on my own. They cannot do this on their own. They need the family support.
Yeah, I'd like to add that help is available. There's a problem gambling helpline. There's treatment services available. There's mutual aid groups such as Gamblers Anonymous. So there are options. There's also self-exclusion. You can ban yourself from the online venues. Use what's available. Use these resources. Treatment does work.
Treatment does work. We also have residential treatment available in Ontario. And also, it's important to communicate in a non-judgmental way, but also realizing the potential of harm that it can have for the entire family. So being transparent with bank accounts, loans, it's important to be aware of that because even we know that you can't force anybody into treatment, but there's a way to minimize harm as well, and families can get support in understanding a little bit how that works if they look for treatment for themselves, even if the person with gambling problems is not ready to seek treatment at that moment.
Hi there, my name's Haley. Richard, my question's for you. I just want to know what made you kind of say, okay, I have a problem and seek recovery, and how are you How are you coping now, years later?
with my particular life, I mean, as mentioned, half of it was consumed with sports gambling, and I got to the point where my lies ran out, my sources of funds ran out, my ability to infringe on other people, it just all ran out. I literally had nowhere to go. I I think every person that was part of my life got a lie from me in some point in my life about why I needed money. Some knew it was for gambling, others didn't. There was no more money for me to take from my own house. I mean, my desperation was so bad. I told my wife at one point we were giving out money for a loan, and I made her sign a document that I created so I could pay a debt. And it got to the point where my mind just could not focus anymore. I was a disaster at work. I'd be crying on my way home. I'd be in my house, but I was physically there, but I certainly was not there mentally, emotionally. And it just came to a point where it all had to come out. And this is not the first time. Also, I want to make it known this was not the first time that my family knew about my addiction. It came out many times throughout the 25 years, but again, I continued to lie my way through. I just wanted it to go away. Why? So I could go back to betting, right? It's just, okay, one particular evening, my parents had to come over to my house because my wife discovered my gambling. And I remember the way that the brain works is right away, okay, I'm going to tell my dad I need to talk to him in the basement. That's what I did. I said, Dad, let's go talk in the basement. And I started crying, saying, I need help. I need help. So I just wanted them to go home. That's all I wanted. Just get the hell out of my house. I just want to bet tomorrow again. So that was enough. Enough was enough. My life hit a wall. I'm at a point right now where I am still working to recover my life with my family and my wife. But I don't lie anymore. I don't have to worry if my phone is on the counter because a text message is going to pop up or I left the website open. So that's a wonderful feeling to have, is that choices, decisions I make right now may not be agreed with, but at least they're about normal ways of living. And you're just the man who pisses off, your wife, because that's part of our role too, is it not?
First of all, I just wanted to thank you, Richard, for your incredible honesty in coming here. I don't know how often you do this, but it's very moving to hear your story and your sharing of your lived experience. It's really terrific. So the question I have is in a bit stimulated by the things you've said, but this isn't so much about you. So it's for anyone, which is a couple of times you've said about the predominance of men in the people that you deal with and the people that gamble. And so that's my fundamental question, is that what is it about men and sports gambling? And why is it that they are drawn in such numbers with such consequences in what they do? Simon recently wrote an article about the way in which women are now gravitating to sports betting as a tool of empowerment. I mean, talk about a marketing draw there. I don't know who takes responsibility for that, but it seems that still the lion's share of gambling is done by men. And I'm just curious about what you know about men that draws them in with such severe consequences.
Part of it's related to status. If you're a winner, you want to be a winner. And it doesn't matter how many times you lose. When you're a winner, you are a winner, the center of attention. And if you win at a casino, you are the center of attention. I almost played craps, and I actually bet against myself, and I lost. But they pushed the dice towards me. Congratulations, we have a winner. Don't bet against yourself. You are the center of attention. Everybody's focused on you. If you win at a slot machine, the alarm goes, beep, 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 and the lights flash, and everybody knows you're a winner. And I think that has a lot to do with the appeal of casino gambling. Sports gambling, since a lot of people have friends who are also sports gamblers, I think, and sports fans. Being a winner in your social group is also a big issue. So I mean, it doesn't. You don't have to win all the time. Just when you do win, you're the winner. And they also say that losing is the second best experience because that means you're now due for a win.
But yeah, so yeah.
Why aren't I motivated? I watch tons of sport. I've done sport all my life, long life. So, but I'm not drawn to gamble. I'm not drawn to.
Yeah. So culturally, I think, the way I look at it culturally, so you are, I think, the minority of women who continue to be, involved in sports. Women are still actively discouraged reaching adolescence to not participate in sports as not being very feminine. We know that despite the fact that the best soccer scorer in the world is a female, when you Google it, it appears as males. We all know that. And also, like Nigel was saying, there's something to do with status. And that has been very much something that culturally has been reserved for women. Like you're saying now, using this tactic of saying empowering women is making use of that. So I think there's a lot of cultural factors behind it.
I'll touch on that a little bit, at least from the way I see it. Ma'am, do you have a son, a nephew, a grandson? Do any of them, have they ever played soccer, baseball, hockey, football? All of them. And there's a very good chance every man in this room has picked up a hockey stick or kicked a soccer ball or shot a basketball or picked up a tennis racket or a golf club. And pretty much every man outside has done the same thing. And sports is embedded in the life of them, predominantly, not all, but sports is a major part of a man's life. It just is. It's what we do. Sunday football, Saturday night hockey. What guy has never thought, man, I wish I could wear that blue and white jersey on Saturday night and play at Scotiabank? We talk about it over beer and wings after our own men's league game. We talk about it while we're golfing with each other. We talk about it, while we're skiing, while we're doing all the things we do. Sports is just ingrained in a man's brain. We all think we know who's going to win on Saturday night at Scotiabank. I knew that was going to happen. I knew Austin Matthews would score. I knew the Leafs would blow the series against the Boston Bruins. No offense, right? So I think the men are so more susceptible because I just think sports is such a bigger part of our being. And I would think, and I don't know, because again, I'm not here with data and statistics, but the increase in gambling in women may be rising because of the predominance of the WNBA, the PWHL, and it appears that women's sports is getting real good traction to contributing to all the major sports. And that could even be a long-term data analytic that someone has to look at, right? What if they become with a professional football or once baseball? What if they can compete with all the men on all the levels? Are we going to have the same amount of women now thinking, oh, I know who's going to win between Toronto and Ottawa when they play Saturday night? I apologize, I don't know where they play. But I just think generally, at least I know for myself, I always thought I knew who was going to win. I tried, and unfortunately, I failed miserably.
So just a couple of points before the next question. I will point out, I think what Richard's elucidating is just that men are dumb.
It'll
Yeah.
take less time.
So, and I'm right with you. There are, it seems to me from some of the studies that I've read, I mean, certainly there is an element, there's a cultural element. As we know, a lot of girls do stop participating in sports around 13, 14. That's right around the time when the boys become the hardcore data nerds. And it's not as if we haven't been studying the backs of our baseball cards, up to that point, but that's when it gets really serious. And so the gateway to actually knowing all the data to then place bets, because I think you started around that age, right?
Yep, 16, 17.
There we go, right? So by that point, girls, at least their participation in sports playing has dropped off. So they may be a little bit less inclined to participate in sports betting, at least until these new ad campaigns that insist they've come a long way, baby. I will also note that, and my understanding is that women, in fact, do represent at least 50% of casino players. Is that not right? And certainly online casino, there are, in fact, also now women-only online casino brands. At least one in Ontario, Betty, I believe, is a female-oriented online casino brand.
Yeah. Years ago, women used to be about a third, represent about a third. With the rise of online, it increased to about 50%. And we're going to see what's going to happen with sports.
Thank you. I want to touch on this conversation, but first, in response to a point that was made earlier about revenue and what will be done with the taxation revenue, I was speaking with Sasha Stark, who works with GRIA, or the Gambling Research Exchange of Ontario, which, to those of you who don't know, is like a research and data repository, and they do consulting work for jurisdictions internationally. And they said that their revenue is actually a lot more shaky in recent years because they used to have earmarked funding from the government that they receive as a part of the taxation that's no longer present. So I do think when we have this conversation about it being a public health approach, where the money goes is a really interesting question, and I'm hoping to see what comes of that. With regards to this discussion, I'm 30 years old. I grew up in Edmonton, go Oilers, and I saw this happen in live time. And what I would add to the conversation is it's no surprise that young men have this emergence of this online gambling addiction in adolescence, because what happens in adolescence is a lot of sort of intense involvement in sports ends. People get to 16, 17, 18, their high school sports stops. Okay, they didn't make it to the WHL. They didn't make it to, college or varsity athletics. Where does this life-defining association and correlation, something you've extracted so much value and meaning from, where does it go? And so it's no surprise that then a sort of logical channel is, well, sports is still happening. I feel like I still have an insider scoop. I know these plays. I learned all these things, when I was in midget triple or bantam double, whatever. And so it's a really ripe target to capitalize. My worry is the indirect ways these gambling companies and Bet365 and stuff can impact. And to give examples, I have lots of my friends who were very involved in hockey in Edmonton, who now work as journalists, not for the Globe and Mail, but for Blue Jays Nation, Oilers Nation. Who funds these entities? Online gambling companies. It's a conversation that's not happening right now. And what we also don't realize is people in my generation aren't going to the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, the New York Times for sports coverage. We're looking at these Instagram accounts. We're looking at the memes that people our age are working for. They are being funded by these online gambling companies. It's a really unique issue because when we talk about the outreach that alcohol had, that smoking had, the way that they weren't able to embed themselves in media, in a media landscape that is suffering. I'm sure our moderator can talk about this a lot. And so it's what gives me the heebie-jeebies. And in addition to the public health approach, we need to also look at a policy approach, because there's a huge vacuum of people who are vulnerable and can be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I always say follow the money, because that's where you get explanation for a lot of things that seem unexplainable.
So I think we've got time for one more question, please.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This has been really great. My friend here told me that this was happening. I'm a parent of a boy who started using betting apps probably around the age of 17. He's now just turned 20. He went to an all-boys school, and all of his buddies were using those apps in grade 11 and 12. Yes, he was doing the group fantasy pooling betting from a much younger age, probably 13. He's played hockey all throughout his life. And he went to university first year in Halifax in September, and he phoned me during winter exams. It was December 19th, at 6 a.m. in the morning in despair because he had drained his checking account. He lost $1,500 in a couple of hours. He was in the middle of studying for exams. He had been up all night. He was bored, was taking a break, and he had already won a few times. Like was mentioned, they let you win. He'd won a couple hundred, then he won 300, then he won 400, and then he started losing. And he was going to try and win that money back. And thankfully, he only had $1,500 left in his checking account, but he does have a savings account, and he wanted to bring more money from the savings account into the checking account. And I'm so grateful that he called me and he asked me to change his passwords. We spoke on the phone for 2 hours about, I have a background, very lived experience in 12-step recovery, not in gambling, but I have been in AA for 17 years. He was 2 when I came into AA. What I'm saying is perhaps he has a predisposition to genetically, but I would love to know. My question is, because he's still very, very aware. He's still very emotionally, he has so much shame around that loss. And I keep telling him, it's not your fault. You've been targeted. You're not exclusive. This is happening to a lot of young people. My question is, are there parent forums? I looked, I Googled, you know how hard it was to get him off of Betway when he was on that platform when he was 17 illegally? It was way harder than trying to cancel a Prime account. And then the latest one that he lost the money was with Roobet, and that's an American platform as well. So anyways, if there's any parenting, like parent forums and groups for who have children, I mean, like I said, he just turned 20, but I would love to be a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing, and I'm sorry. But I'm also glad that he reached out to you. Daniela, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I echo that. And I'm so glad that he had the connection he has with you to be able to talk to you and call you. I think that's, that needs to be spoken about. In terms of, there are several gambling treatment agencies that have parent groups. We certainly do have it here at CAMH, and you can just call Access CAMH and say, I'm a parent concerned about my child's gambling. Can I be connected with the problem gambling service? Our parent groups, they happen depending, of course, on the amount of parents that we have interested, but there are certainly ways that you can get information and get some support with that.
Just before we wrap up, Richard, I don't know, did you want to speak to that at all?
We can chat after. I can provide details, but through the GA program, there's also a supplementary program called Gamanon, which is the arm of GA, which helps family and friends of those who have someone in their family with a gambling addiction. And I know my mother goes to it, and it's helped her heal. And I'm sure there'd be value for you. So it's very simple. You can just go online. I believe it's gatoronto.org. And oh.
What's happened get through this as a young person, and when we've already talked about mom kid and mother target, like it's more about advocacy. What are we doing to tax the young men if we're really targeting
So I suppose that will be the next panel. But I'd like to thank you for the questions and for the contributions, and Richard and Daniela and Nigel, thank you very much for participating today, and for everything that you've shared. I would just like to point out to anyone still online and here in the audience, of course, if you're interested in reading the CAMH Gambling Policy Framework, you can find that on camh.ca. And my understanding is it will be sent to those who were part of the virtual audience. So with that, Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.